he was so shocked when he saw the movie in the theater because the filming, he said when they were finished, it was visually just a beautiful film. The color, the composition, everything was just exquisite. And then, of course, the color timing was so far off that it really changed it, made it ugly, and I think it helped the movie, but it made the thing a pretty ugly film at one level. So, any questions? Did you like watching the blood?
Put the microphone a little closer.
What?
Put the microphone a little closer.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. Any questions? Yes, over there.
I know 15 years ago the house was a restaurant. What is the house now?
I think it might be a restaurant still. It's gone through 3 or 4 owners. There's a guy who owns the thing that's gone through 3 or 4 restaurants. Different people that run it. And the last I heard was that the current people running the restaurant were very proud of the Chainsaw Connection. When we did some of the extras for the gold box with the DVD, I went with the film crew there, and they'd arranged ahead of time for me to do a walkthrough, so they could do a walkthrough with me and put that into the extras. And by the time we got there, the people who ran the restaurant were so sick of the whole movie connection that they let me in with the cameraman, but nobody else. It had to be only 2 of us. And we did the preliminary walkthrough, and then the cameraman was going to go back and do some pickup shots so that we could do inserts and stuff. And they had already locked the doors and wouldn't let him back in. But now apparently the current restaurant owners like the connection. I hear the steaks are really good. Yes?
Yeah, there's very, it seems like there's 2 distinct motivations of masks in the movie. I was just kind of curious about what Toby, gave directions for, how to do each of those characters.
Okay. Yeah, there are actually 3 masks. There's what we call the killing mask, which he wears until the cook brings Sally home, and then he has the old lady mask with the gray hair and the bun, and then there's the pretty woman mask that he wears for dinner. And actually, Toby never told me how to play Leatherface. I mean, we talked about the character's personality and what his relationship was, but it was completely up to me to figure out how to play him. But the idea of the mask was that he put on a different face. This is what Toby told me. He said he puts on a different face depending on what he's doing. Because everything is in the mask for Leatherface. When he's cooking dinner and being domestic, he's being a grandmother. So he puts on a grandma mask because that's what he's doing now and that's what he is emotionally. He puts the pretty woman mask on because they have a guest for dinner and he wants to look nice for her. And there's a little bit in there which got cut, which is he goes out in the middle of the dinner scene, he wanders off into the next room and puts a little extra makeup on. And he puts on extra lipstick and then sort of powders his face a little bit. And I think it's because he wants to look especially nice. Oh, she's so pretty. But that got cut, and it makes sense to cut it because it kills the pacing of the dinner scene. So anyway, that's the whole idea of the mask, that he is the mask. Over here. Why did that movie what? I'm sorry, I can't. Oh, why was I? Okay, sorry. They asked me to be in 2 and 3 and 4. But in every case, the attitude was, it's a guy in a mask. Anybody can play this part. So we're going to pay you what we pay a guy off the street. In the second and third ones, they offer me union minimum. And in the third one, they actually offered me per week less than the union day rate. And I was particularly angry then because that was Kim Hinkle, who was the original writer, and I had already been fucked over once by that. And now they're going to do this to me. And I did all the negotiations through somebody who was a production assistant. So I told him what I wanted. I said, I know you don't have a lot of money, so here's what I'll do it for. And she comes back to me and says, Toby, Kim says no, it's the offer stands. And so I said, well, I'm not going to be in the movie then. Oh, well, you have a message for Kim? I said, yeah, you can tell him to go fuck himself. I did. It's like every actor's dream. And then for 5, which is the 2003 remake, they had a casting associate, whatever that is. I mean, it's like these names that don't, it's like, no, sir, you're not a clerk in this grocery store. You're an associate. But the pay is shit. So they offer me a part as the truck driver at the end. It's a one-day shoot. I have a line, which was okay. I mean, I understood they didn't want me to play Leatherface. But they offered me union minimum. And I said, I'm not doing it for union minimum. And she said, well, now, we're not using any name brand actors in this movie. Well, there's lie number 1. And number 2, they've all agreed to do it for union minimum. And I said, the only reason you want me in your movie is to put my name on the poster. I'm not giving you my name on the poster for $650. That's what they offered me. And I realized at that moment that I am indeed a whore. But I am not a cheap whore. In the back. I'm sorry, I don't know, I'm having...
I said, when you think about
one person at a time.
I said, when you think of past 1,000 words, it's similarities.
Oh, yeah, I was really looking forward to seeing that movie because when the studio refused to release it without changes, I thought maybe there's really something to this movie. But the problem I thought was, Rob Zombie talks about how Chainsaw is his favorite movie, and this is an homage to Chainsaw. I thought it was really a kind of a rip-off of Chainsaw, and I thought the movie was nonsensical. I thought the part of the movie that I thought worked really well was Captain Spaulding. That whole opening and the rest of the movie. What's with the rabbit suits? So I did not enjoy that movie very much. I liked Devil's Rejects more, but I thought toward the end it was trying to be Thelma and Louise. Yes. Well, I thought about this book on and off for a long time, and what happened was I was approached by a publisher who wanted me to write a memoir about my life, including Chainsaw. But don't worry, I'll have someone write it for you. And I thought 2 things. One is, I write for a living. I can do my own book. And 2, I'm not interested in writing a memoir. Nobody's interested in my life. They are interested in Chainsaw. So that's what really got me seriously thinking about doing a book about the making of Chainsaw. The other reason was, time is passing. 3 of the guys are dead. And as time goes by, I won't say our memories fail, but I think our memories get more creative. I hear, when I do panels with some of the other actors from Chainsaw, some of the people tell the same story entirely differently every time. And so I thought, it's really time to do it. If I'm ever going to do it, now is the time. And so I got in touch with everyone I could find and interviewed them, because I didn't want it to just be me. I wanted to tell the story from their points of view, and I wanted to hear their take on events I remember, because I wanted to make sure my memory was reasonable. Only 2 people never responded. Toby Hooper, which I expected, and Sally Richardson, who was one of the assistant directors and did the still photography and worked as part of one of the editors. And I found out later the reason Sally wouldn't respond to me was because she died. So that was 4 at that point that were gone. So that's anyway why I did the book. Plus I thought it would make me a fortune. Okay, I didn't, but anyway, that's what I was doing. Not your problem? Oh, good, thank you. Yes?
What did your family and friends think of when you came out with this movie in 1974?
Well, a bunch of them went to the premiere with me. And a friend of mine just wrote a piece. He's actually a very successful novelist and film writer. And he just wrote a piece for Texas Monthly called My Double Date with Leatherface. And it was because for the premiere of the movie, he and his girlfriend, now wife, and my date, went together with a bunch of my friends. And we sat in the back of the theater and watched the movie, so it was a little remembrance of that. So my friends were real pleased but I took my mother. And this was really interesting. I took my mother and her friend Dorothy, who at the age of 50 had never left the state of Texas. So we went to the movie theater, and we sat in the back corner over here. And there were about 6 or 8 rows in front of us were several teenage girls. I mean, they must have been 18, 19 years old. They were as young as you could be and still get into the theater. And we were all noisy and laughing and stuff before the film was starting. They kept looking back and giggling. And then as the movie progressed, they slid lower and lower in their seats. And then they were like this, and then when the movie ended, they jumped up and ran out. And they were really terrified to know we were right there. So I asked my mother if she had been frightened, and she said no. And I said, why weren't you frightened? She goes, I knew that was just my baby up there. So, yes, right there. I got involved because when I was in college, I was involved with some plays. And I ran into a guy who I'd been in Of Mice and Men with. He played Lenny, I played Lenny. What was the name of the character? George. No, I played George, he played Lenny. Yeah, George Small, whatever. No, he played George, I played Lenny. Yeah, that's right. See, memories. So, anyway, and we were just reminiscing about the play and, the work we had been doing. And this friend of his joined the conversation and said, gosh, there are these guys in town. And this is the twisted part. He said, there are these guys in town making a horror movie. And he said, it's too bad. You would have been perfect to play the killer, but they've already cast the part. So I thought, well, that's a pointless thing to tell me. So about a week later, I run into him on the street, and he says, hey, the guy they hired is holed up drunk in a motel. He won't come out. And they're looking. So he gave me the casting director's name, who turns out was somebody I knew. And I said, well, what part are you playing? And he said, decided not to be in the movie. It's bad karma. It was the 70s. Bad karma to be in something like this. So I went down and met the casting director, and he said he'd give me a call, which I thought meant, get lost, But he called the next day or 2 days later and said, come down, and I met the director and the writer, and I got the part. And then when I signed the contract, we had what they called a contract party, which was not a party at all. It was a gathering at someone's apartment where we sign our contracts and get measured for our clothes. Makeup looks at us and decides what has to happen. She looked at me and said, your beard is going, and I had real long hair. She said, I can do the hair because I can tie it in a sumo knot on top. It'll go onto the mask. So anyway, I said to the director I said, well, he gets the contract signed and he goes, I knew when I met you, I was going to cast you in this part. And I thought, God, what confidence. And I said, why? And he goes, because you filled the door. I got cast because I was the biggest person who tried out for the door. And then, like I said before, 6'4" wasn't big enough, so they put another 3 inches on me with the heels. And you know, I didn't know about collecting. I didn't know how big the movie was. So those were my boots. I took them home. And about 15 years later, I thought, God, they're awful moldy looking. And I threw them away. The apron I wore sold at auction for $10,000. So, yes, other questions? Yes.
Not so much a question as a comment. When I first saw the movie, I lived in New Orleans, 1977. Went down Canal Street late one night to watch it. I watched the movie. The first thing I thought is, where did they find these people? Where did they find these people? They seem so honest, so direct. And I walked back down to my apartment, corner of Avenue and Second Avenue. On the way down Bourbon Street, there was a lot of police activity. And I went down the street, and there was a young man standing in the middle of the intersection with blood all over him. And he was having some kind of a freak out, whether it was alcohol or drugs or what it was. People were all standing around watching. Police were standing around. They were trying to approach him. They took him and threw him in a paddy wagon. And this guy was shrieking and screaming. And he said, right after watching your movie, and I went back and locked my door. I went to bed and I was like, wow, this is so real. It was an amazing experience, and the film has such power and intensity that I congratulate you all.
Thanks very much. It's interesting because Ed Neal, who is ADD and psychotic, is nothing like the hitchhiker. Jim Sedow, who played the cook, was nothing like the cook. And I was amazed. I have been amazed over the years, the number of people who are shocked when they meet me that I'm nothing like Leatherface. Many women are disappointed. Yeah, way back there. Yeah.
How much was it based, or how much did they loosely base it on, like, Ed Gein and whatever else had been going on at that time? Like, Manson, Ed Gein, I heard a lot of it was based off him.
Actually, I asked Toby and Kim one night when we were filming where they got the idea, and Toby told me, that Ed Gein gave them the idea for the mask and the bone furniture. Other than that, they just put everything that had scared him in the movie together. And in fact, Toby now claims that he didn't even know who Ed Gein was. That he had based it on Ed Gein, but he'd never heard his name, which is not true, because he said to me, Ed Gein. Everything else is made up. The chainsaw happened because before they started writing the script, he was Christmas shopping at Montgomery Ward, which was like a poor man's Sears back in the Dark Ages. And it was so jammed up with customers that he was freaking out and trying to get out of the store. And he couldn't push against the crowd to get to the exit. And he realized he looked around him and saw that he was in the hardware section. And there was a chainsaw display. And he had this thought, and it became the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. If I had one of these, I could cut my way out. So that was the inspiration for that. Yes, over there.
How did you get involved in the last one where you had the cameo in it, and what did you think of that film?
Okay. Remember the part about being a whore? The producer approached my agent and asked if I would be interested, and the first thing he did, which meant that I fell in love with the producer, he said, does Gunnar think he could play Leatherface again? And I thought, well, either way, if he's lying, he's so nice about it. You know? And I told my agent, I said, no, it's 40 years later. I'm 40 years older, and I just had a knee replaced. I can barely walk. So, you know, and as it turned out, it takes place 40 years later. So anyway, you know, they offered me a part, and essentially, he offered so much money that even if I had a chip on my shoulder, I wasn't going to say no. Well, actually, my agent asked for so much money, and the producer goes, okay. And that's how I got it. I really enjoyed working on that movie. They built the house, they went to the original house, measured everything, took photographs, and then used production stills. So when I arrived on the set, it looked like I was walking down the road to the original house, and suddenly it was 1973 and not 2011. I really enjoyed shooting the stuff I worked on. It was, in one way, so totally the same, and in other ways, totally different. In Chainsaw, the original Chainsaw, we had a total of 20K for all of our lighting and all of our night lighting, which is one 10K light and two 5Ks. And as the writer, as the cinematographer said to me, I thought I could burn a city down with that much power. Which is why this movie, all the night stuff is at least 2 stops underexposed because they just didn't have enough light. And it worked, but doing the Chainsaw 3D, my stuff is a daytime scene, and they put a fill on me that was 10K. Just a fill, a little spot to sort of get the highlights right. That light was so hot that when they flip it on, I could feel my skin literally start to burn from the heat. So, anyway, I really enjoyed that experience. The movie, I like what the producer was trying to do with that movie. I thought he was very smart in going back to the original story and doing a sequel to the original and having it try to capture some of the feel of the original. In truth, I wish they had stuck with 1973. I think the movie would have worked better if they had stayed with that time frame instead of jumping. And the jump is supposed to be 20 years because you got this infant who is just an infant, and then when you do the time jump, she's about 20, 21. But in fact, it's clearly 40 years later. Because it says on the tombstone, it says 2013. He's got an iPhone that's better than any phone that's yet to be presented. The shares that. So there are these sort of anachronistic issues with the movie. So I like the first 10 minutes. It's the greatest film ever made. I'm in it. But after that, it's not as good as I hoped it would be. I think that's a fair assessment. But I have to say the producer worked really hard to try to make it a lot more than the earlier sequels had been. I'll call on you in a minute, but you've already asked it. But did you have a question here? Yeah.
Two-part question. My favorite scene in the whole movie is that last, 10 seconds of you, the big swing that chainsaw with the sun.
Yeah.
Was that shot at sunrise or sunset? And the second part, what is your absolute favorite scene?
Okay, the dance at the end is shot actually at sunset. We started shooting early in the day when she jumps out the window and to escape and runs down the driveway. Because it's supposed to be very early in the morning, we could shoot only when there was a cloud in front of the sun, so it took us all day to shoot that 3 or 4 minutes because we had to wait for the clouds. If there was direct sunlight, it was not going to be convincing as a pre-dawn shot. When we got to that, we were running out of time, so we had to really rush because the sun was going down and then it was over. We were not going to get another day to shoot. And interestingly, my favorite scene to shoot and to watch is that scene, because I improvised that. Toby just told me to stomp around like I'm really mad. You know, he was such a director. Toby was a great director, technically. You know, the way he organized the shot, the way he framed it, and you know, and laid it out, and the way he moves the camera, all of that. But he didn't give the actors any real direction, which is good. I mean, actors love that. Most actors don't want to be told how to read a line. You know, that's my job. But he didn't really understand much about acting. He really didn't. I mean, he told me that the other actors wanted to stay away from me because they wanted to be genuinely frightened when they encountered me, you know, to die. And I thought, so they don't know anything about acting. And then I found out later that he told them that I was an asshole. And that I did not like people, and I had told him explicitly that these people were to stay away from me. So he's basically trying to create something that didn't need to be created. There's a scene where when Leatherface kills Jerry, he comes into the kitchen and then Leatherface comes in and slams him in the head. Alan hadn't seen me in costume. And he got all ready and, you know, he's like concentrating, he's doing method and this whole thing. And when he turns around, he gives out this huge scream. And then he ran out of the room. And I'm standing there and Toby goes, great scream. Stay in the room next time. So it had caused that kind of problem. But with that scene, he just told me to get angry. So again, like I said earlier, I couldn't see very well out of the mask. So I'm going, ooh, I'm so angry. You know, this sort of thing. I didn't know what to do. You know, be angry. You know, have you ever had that director tell you that? Be angry. Look through the window like you're angry. Now look like you're mean. What's that joke about? His acting runs the emotional gamut from A to B. So I was just stomping around, and I turned quickly and realized that my limited vision, Toby ducked. And then I thought, Toby's afraid of me, and he knows I can't see. So that whole dance was, I just decided that this was my only chance in the filming to scare Toby. So I started spinning around because I was winding up to take a swing at him. Because he was standing, they'd cleared everybody away. There was just the cameraman, you know, cinematographer and Toby, and then the sound guy on the boom was up behind them with the boom over him. And they were dancing around me. So I thought, Toby knows I can't see him. So that whole dance as I'm winding up, actually I'm going this way. And then I bring the saw down as close as I could. I couldn't tell how close I was because I wanted Toby to be scared of me. And that's how that happened. And you can tell how close I came to the lens because that was a slightly wide lens, which means things are closer than they seem. So when the bar of the saw comes close enough to completely obscure the vision from the lens, it means that bar is no more than 2 inches from the front face of the lens when I swung it. But it was all just improvised as a way of scaring the bejesus out of Toby. Way back there.
You prefer acting or writing?
Oh, writing. Yeah, I mean, acting is a great balance to it, writing, because writing, I sit alone in a room, just be in the screen. And acting is a very social environment. So I like acting, but writing has always been the primary thing. This is why, after Chainsaw, I did one movie, which I never was paid for. And I decided I needed to make a decision, and the decision was I was not going to work in movies. I didn't want to go chasing a movie career. I was really interested in writing. I had moved to Maine at that point, and then Bob Burns, I'm making movies. I'm working for a director. Nobody's heard of him. His name is Wes Craven. He's doing a movie called The Hills Have Eyes. There's a part for you. Can you be in LA in 2 weeks? And I said, no, I don't do movies anymore. And I turned everything down for about 18 years. And then I got a call from a friend of mine I'd known. I'd known him years before. He said, my dream was always to move to Hollywood and make movies, and I'm doing that. Why don't you come out? So I thought, why am I turning it down? I can do this. So that's how I got back to doing it. And I worked in one of the greatest cult films of all times, Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers. Which literally my first direction from the director was stand in this window and look mean. So another that was heavy on the acting. Yes?
Yeah, I heard you say you got paid $800 to do Chainsaw originally, and then you guys had a deal where you were going to get money afterwards for whatever the film did.
Yeah.
Can you expand on the reason why no one seemed to get rich off of this movie?
Yeah, Mafia, I think, is the shortest explanation. The distributor was Bryanston Films. They had made their money distributing Deep Throat and financed Deep Throat. They also distributed Andy Warhol's Frankenstein. And they just offered what appeared to be the best deal. And I did a bunch of research for the book about this, but essentially, they totally underreported the revenues of the film. So, and there are two parts to it. They underreported revenues. We were supposed to get paid every 90 days. We didn't get paid for 9 months. We went through 3 pay periods before they decided that they had made enough money to give us some. And their check to us was about $25,000. And it should have been at that point $2 million. The other half of the reason none of us made any money is because the movie shares were worth a fraction of what we were led to believe. I own points in Vortex, which was the producing agency. I didn't know that Vortex didn't own, it was the producing company. I didn't know that Vortex was only part of the financing, that there was another company called PITS, P-I-T-S, which, encouragingly enough, stood for Pie in the Sky. So that part, plus the public producer's rep, who actually sold the movie, got a piece off the top before any money. So my share of the movie was worth something like 1/3 or 1/4 of what I was led to believe. So when this whopping check came in and I got my check, my first royalty check after nine months was $47 and some cents. And this is a movie, nobody knows quite how much money it's made. There was an infinite series of lawsuits. Everybody sued everybody else. And the guess is that it's made something north of $100 million. This is a movie that cost about $126,000 to make. So you can figure out that's 8,000 times. Is that right? 100 million is times 8. No, 8. It's 800 times the cost of the movie is what it grossed, roughly. So that's why we did it. So basically, the distributor made sure that they paid us as little money as possible, and then the people who controlled the money that came into the producers tried to distribute it in a way that was to their advantage. When they sold the last sequel rights, which I know they paid well over $1 million for, so the producers got well over $1 million. As far as I know, I've never received any share of that $1 million that came in. I did Chainsaw 3D. I've made as much in residuals since the movie came out, since Chainsaw 3D came out. My residuals for that movie, not my paycheck, equal the total amount of money I have made from owning a share of Chainsaw Massacre in 40 years.
Wow.
So when people ask me, "You're rich, aren't you?" They say that to me a lot. I go, "Yeah, I'm fabulously wealthy." "What did they pay you?" "Beyond your wildest dreams." I worked it out that if I had gotten a job at McDonald's, I made $2 an hour, by the way. That's what I figure out because during the filming, because we worked about 100 hours a week, and I was being paid 200 a week, so it's about $2 an hour. I really could have gotten a job at McDonald's and made more. But that's not why I did the movie. I mean, that's the other part. You know, as hard as it was, and as difficult and miserable as an experience as it was one of the finest experiences of my life to work on a movie like that and be miserable and unhappy and exhausted. Strangely enough, there is pleasure in pain, isn't there, after all? So, way back.
Are you a horror movie buff? If so, like, have you always been into horror? What's your favorite in most recent times and back then?
Well, as a kid, I was always terrified of, you know, I lived in a very small town in Maine as a kid, and they had like a second-run theater that showed movies that were really old. And, I mean, they showed contemporary movies, but I remember being in the movie theater when they showed a trailer for Frankenstein, 1931, you know, they're still showing it in Maine. And in the trailer, there's a shot where he's looking through the window, and the woman is at her vanity doing her makeup, and his shadow, whenever there's a lightning bolt, his shadow is cast on the wall beside her, but she's so absorbed in looking at herself, she doesn't notice the shadow. I was so terrified I left the theater. So I was very scared as a kid. But then I started watching the 50s creature stuff. Creature from the Black Lagoon, which scared me. The praying, what was it called? Deadly Mantis, The Crawling Eye, and my favorite, Them. And those are the movies that I really got to enjoy. My favorite old horror movie is the original Haunting. Where, like Chainsaw, you see nothing. And it's interesting because I recently watched it again about 5 or 6 years ago, and I thought it held up. In fact, I thought it was a better movie watching it as an adult than when I was 15 years old or whatever it was when I saw it. I also recently watched again Frankenstein and also Dracula, and I found Frankenstein really enjoyable. But there's very little to that movie. There's very little plot. There's very little character work. But I like the movie. It has this feel. But Dracula, I think it's unwatchable. I don't know if people like that movie, but to me it was just unwatchable. It's very clear when you watch that movie that it was. They had written a stage play from the book, and it had played, I guess, on Broadway as a stage play, and then they restaged it for a film, and you can tell that it's just a stage play on film, with Bela Lugosi, the world's most static actor. You know, he just stands there. So, and of course he did a great horror movie called The Raven. Did you ever see that? Yeah. You are like a gob? Yes, like a gob. So, modern contemporary horror movie, I really liked Alien, but it's now an old horror movie, isn't it? It's 20-some years old. 30? Wow, man. Yeah, I remember watching that movie thinking, and I said this out loud. You ever do that, accidentally say something out loud in the theater? I did that when I watched Titanic. I stood up, and as I walked out, I said way too loud, I can't stand this crap anymore. But in Alien, when they spot the alien spaceship, I went, "It's a giant IUD!" Which didn't go over well, by the way. More contemporary than that, most horror movies don't really thrill me. I'm trying to think of something. I thought the original Saw was pretty good. I actually got, at the end of that movie, I'm saying, "Oh my God, he's cutting his foot off, he's cutting his foot off." And then I thought, no, he's not. You know, but I thought they did it very well, like you think you were watching it, and I liked that. Paranormal Activity, I could have done without that movie. I really don't know. And of course, Jaws, that's again way too old, isn't it? That's like 38 years old now or something. First half of Jaws was a horror movie, the second half was an action picture. I don't even know what are people making now? I don't like the vampire movies, all these Twilight movies. Those are just bad romances. So,
How about Poltergeist?
yeah, I mean, the original Poltergeist, yeah, sure, I liked it. It was too much of a Spielberg movie. I thought that whole opening where suddenly you're in a neighborhood in that magic light of early evening with kids riding their bicycles and playing games on the street, and it's crowded with kids. I've never seen a neighborhood that looks like that. The last time I saw that neighborhood was in E.T. A movie which, by the way, as we were saying over dinner tonight, I utterly despised. Which at the time used to make people angry if I'd say, oh, I didn't. So I'm really bad on current horror movies. I tried to watch Walking Dead. You get a 3-hour idea and pack it into an 8-hour series. I watched an entire episode where they argued about what they were going to do next, and I thought, no, this is what the screenwriters are supposed to do. You put the screenwriters in a room and let them argue about what happens next. So I'm not going to be very good at giving you an answer about what contemporary horror movies I like. I know there's some stuff I've seen that I thought was pretty good, but it's more and more of the same to me, a lot of it. Yes?
I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and when this movie came out, my brother, who was a college film student, took me to see this film, and I absolutely loved it. How many years after it was released did you feel like it got complete traction, and it changed your life?
Well, first, there's this misconception about Chainsaw that it's a cult movie, that it was a cult movie. And it never was a cult movie. It was a huge hit immediately. Danny Pearl told me that he was the DP, the cinematographer on this. Danny moved to LA in the meantime, after the filming, he moved to LA. And he said, once the movie came out, every time he went into a coffee shop to get, a pastry and a donut, or a cup of coffee, he said, invariably, he would overhear some conversation in that cafe about Chainsaw Massacre. So it was huge right away, and the critics despised it. Johnny Carson didn't like it, even Johnny Carson. And I knew right away it was going to be big because so many people hated the movie, except Brett Creed said it was the scariest movie he'd ever seen. So I figured right away it was going to be big, but I had no notion of how huge it was going to be, and especially because I moved to Maine, and where I didn't own a television for 20 years. And I didn't even listen to the radio, I just didn't, I was in a different world. And I was watching, when I got a TV, I was watching Cheers one night. And the Rebecca character, Kirstie Alley, is going to be spending the weekend house sitting in a state out in the country. And the whole episode is she's lording it over everybody how she's going out to the estate for the weekend. And then the last act, she's out there, and it's getting dark, she gets scared, she locks all the windows, locks all the doors, and sits down in the living room with all the lights on, and she hears a noise, and the last line of the show is, "Oh, Leatherface, I hope that's not you." And it was at that moment that I understood how the movie had really entered the culture. That you don't have to explain on mainstream TV who Leatherface is. And then I thought, that's how big that movie had become. But I didn't understand that until that time. Yes?
You talked just a little bit about character development, you mentioned Frankenstein a couple of times. There's always a little bit of a childlike similarity.
Sure. So the question is to talk about developing the character. Toby and Kim really did the research for me in the sense that when we met, they explained his personality that he was severely retarded, he was quite insane, and he was very violent. His mental function was very low level, and by the way, for those of us who are worried about correctness, his violent behavior was not a result of either his retardation or his insanity. I got called on the carpet for that in an interview. Are you implying that retarded people are violent? But, so I just want to make it clear that I know they're not violent because I'm one. And he also explained, Toby also explained that for all of this violence and this brutality in the character, he's terrified of his family. He'll do anything they tell him. So that's really the dynamic of the character. It's also true of him that, which I thought about later more and more, especially when I was working on the book, he doesn't, it's only toward the end that he goes after people. He kills people that come into the house, that violate the space. The only time he goes out and makes a mess of things is when he's going with his brother, the hitchhiker, and desecrating these graves under the hitchhiker's direction. Otherwise, the first two people he kills because they went into his house. The third one, the van driver, he kills because he comes into the house, although it looks like he lured him in. Then after that, it's clear he's had enough now, and he goes out and hunts down the others. But, so that's pretty much my notion of it before I started. The problem was I wasn't going to have a face or a voice to characterize him. I had only my body. So what I did was I went to the Austin State School, which is I think it's still there. It's a residential campus for retarded persons. And I've been there before. My mother worked at one of the clinics there, and I had actually applied for a job there working with blind, retarded, emotionally disturbed children. Now there's somebody who's got a lot of strikes against them. But they wouldn't hire me. I don't know why. They kept saying, "Oh, good, we're really glad you're interested in the job. Would you come back tomorrow and see how you like it?" And then they wouldn't hire. They just never would commit. So I'd been out there a bit, and so I went out there and spent a couple of days walking around and watching the way people moved and held their bodies, trying to figure out how I was going to represent Leatherface's mentality without having a voice or a face. And I watched the way people held themselves, how they moved their bodies, and I tried to find a series of postures and motions that worked. And the big problem with doing that is you don't want to assemble a bunch of unrelated ticks and go, "Hey, there, see, I've got a character." So I had to work on figuring out what worked as a whole. So I did that, and when on the second day, I was walking down the sidewalk on the campus, and a couple of staff people were walking toward me. So I just went into Leatherface physically, based on what I had been working on, and walked past them, and they looked right through me like I was not there, like I was a patient. And, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what you said. But anyway, that's when I figured out I had the part. I had the character the way I wanted it. I think that's pretty much the work. But it gave me a real advantage on camera because Paul Partain, who played Franklin in the wheelchair, was so afraid of losing the character, of not being able to become Franklin when they called action, that he sort of fell back on method. He would get to the set, get his costume on, sit in the wheelchair, he wouldn't leave the wheelchair, and he became Franklin and stayed Franklin all day long, which is why we hated him, because we thought he was Franklin. At one point, he's turned to Bill, who played, Bill Vale, who played Kirk, and said, and there's a cooler there with the cold drinks, and he goes, "Kirk, would you get me a Dr. Pepper?" And Bill looked at him and said, "Paul, you can walk. And Paul goes, oh, yeah. And he gets up, you know. So my advantage was that in doing this character and figuring out him physically, I didn't have to worry about finding Leatherface. As soon as they called, as the director said, action, I knew what I had to do. And physically, the movement, which had to do, I can't duplicate it 40 years later, except it had to do with my right arm. That moving my right arm, hunching my shoulder slightly and moving my right arm up brought me physically into the part of Leatherface. So it was very easy for me to physically become Leatherface. I really just did that. And that would trigger the whole body movement thing. So it also allowed me to not ever be Leatherface under the mask. I was inside. I was always myself, except for one bad moment. I was always myself monitoring the Leatherface outside. So anyway, that's how I did that.
Time for one more, actually.
One more, okay. Oh, that's right, it's midnight.
Yeah.
Okay, one more over here. Yeah.
Yeah, your story about Cheers and the name Leatherface. In the film, is there a reference to the name Leatherface?
Yes.
And there is. Where is that film?
I think there are two references. One is when they go upstairs to get Grandpa, the hitchhiker says, Leatherface, come with me, help me get Grandpa now. And then when they're at the dinner table, and the hitchhiker is arguing with the cook, he says, because the cook wants to be the boss, and the hitchhiker says, you're just a cook. Me and Leatherface, we do all the work. You're just the cook. And so those are the 2 points. Yeah, so that's how that comes. Originally, the name of the film, by the way, the working title was Head Cheese. And by the time they started filming, the script title was Leatherface, and I was thinking, oh great, man, I got the title wrong. And then it came out as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I was so pissed. I'm not the title character anymore. And of course, that is the single most important thing about this film. That sold the movie. It's what got people into the theaters to see it. Once they were in the theater, the movie would sell itself. But it's the title of that movie that brought the audience's attention. And that name came up in a poker game. Warren Scarron, the head of the Texas Film Commission, who sold his soul and became our producer's rep in Hollywood, was having a poker game with a bunch of buddies. In the middle of the night, he calls Bill Parsley, and says, I've got it, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it started. Anyway, I'm going to go over here. I've got pictures to sell, and I do all of your stuff, and come on by, or just come by to say yo. Thanks very much.